which is interesting.
When someone emailed that executive.
Ready, John?
I know.
Good afternoon. Senate will come to order. In lieu of a devotional today, we'll have a moment of silence. Thank you. Are there any announcements? Seeing none, we have a bill for referral under Rule 31, S-115. A bill appearing on the notice calendar and affecting the revenue is under the rule referred to the Committee on Finance. We have two Senate resolutions for introduction at this time. The first, SR 8, relating to concurrently conducted electronic meetings, offered by Senator Baruth and the other four members of the Rules Committee. Please listen to a reading of the resolution by title only.
SR 8, Senate resolution relating to concurrently conducted electronic committee meetings.
Now you've heard the reading of the resolution. The chair, in its discretion, will place this resolution on the calendar for action tomorrow. We have Senate Resolution number 9, relating to electronic participation in Senate sessions, again offered by Senator Baruth and the other four members of the Rules Committee. Please listen to the reading of the resolution by title only.
SR 9, Senate resolution relating to electronic participation in Senate sessions.
Now you've heard the reading of that resolution. The chair, in its discretion, will place this resolution on the calendar for action tomorrow. We have Senate bills for introduction. We have S-116, offered by and sponsored by Senator Perchlik. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-116, an act relating to the Board of Trustees of the University of Vermont and State Agricultural College.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill. The bill is hereby referred to the Committee on Education. We have S-117, also introduced by Senator Perchlik. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-117, an act relating to teen parent education program funding.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill. At this point, the bill is referred to the Committee on Education. We have S-118, sponsored by Senator Collmore and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-118, an act relating to exempting all military retirement and military survivor benefit income.
Now, having heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Finance. We have S-119, introduced by Senator Vyhovsky and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-119, an act relating to a public health response to drug use.
Having heard the first reading of the bill is now referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have S-120, sponsored by Senator Hashim. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-120, an act relating to post-secondary schools and sexual misconduct protections.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill. The bill is referred to the Committee on Education. We have now two House bills for reference. First being H-41, introduced by Representative Dolan of Essex Junction. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-41, an act relating to referral of domestic and sexual violence cases to community justice centers.
Now the bill has been read the first time and is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. And we have H-305, introduced by the Committee on Government Operations on February 28th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H305, an act relating to professions and occupations regulated by the Office of Professional Regulation.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill. It is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. And that brings us to the orders of the day. We have on the calendar for action S9, introduced on January 10th. It was referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which reports it has considered the bill and recommends that the bill be amended as appears at page 150 of today's calendar, and that when so amended, the bill ought to pass. I'd like to recognize the senator that the bill ought to move through second reading. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S9, an act relating to the authority of the state auditor to examine the books and records of state contracts.
I'd like to recognize the senator from Addison District, Senator Hardy, for the report of the Committee on Government Operations.
Thank you, Mr. President. S9 is, as you've just heard, a bill related to the authority of the state auditor to examine the books and records of state contractors. The State Auditor of Accounts is one of the 6 statewide elected constitutional officers of the state of Vermont. According to statute, the auditor has the discretion to perform audits of every department, institution, and agency of the state, as well as counties, municipalities, and school districts that receive or disperse state funds. These audits are conducted under the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, or GAGAS, as promulgated by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. State law requires the auditor to audit financial statements of the state, perform compliance and financial audits as required by federal law, conduct regular audits of some programs such as municipal tax incremental financing districts, or TIF districts, and also organizations such as sheriff departments, and perform other audits at the auditor's discretion. Contractors who provide services to the state are subject to audit by the state as laid out in Bulletin 3.5, the Procurement and Contracting Procedures, specifically Attachment C, Section 13, which states, quote, "The records described shall be made available at reasonable times during the period of agreement and for 3 years thereafter for any period required by law for inspection by any authorized representatives of the state or federal government." State agencies issue these contracts can audit the performance of these contracts, and some contracts are also subject to federal audit requirements. Until recently, it was commonly understood that the auditor also had authority included the discretion to audit the performance of these contracts with the state. And the Office of the Auditor has conducted such audits in the past. However, in April 2022, the Vermont State Supreme Court ruled in Hoffer v. OneCare that the state auditor is not an authorized representative or agent of the state, even though the auditor is a statewide constitutional officer of the state of Vermont. Because statute doesn't explicitly authorize the auditor with the duty or discretion to audit contractors with the state. Because statute enumerates the powers of the auditor, but does not explicitly give the auditor the authority to audit state contracts, and because the statute providing oversight of accountable care organizations, or ACOs, like OneCare, does not reference the auditor, the court affirmed that under the plain language of the law, the auditor does not have this authority. In other words, the auditor was attempting to audit the OneCare Accountable Care Organization, which has a huge contract with the state of Vermont to provide oversight and financial disbursements of public funds through the OneCare organization. And when the auditor asked for records about the payroll and large personnel salary increases that were being proposed for the OneCare budget, the court did not feel that he had the authority to do that because under the plain language of the law, the statutes did not give him that authority. The court says where, quote, the legislature has demonstrated that it knows how to provide explicitly for the requested action, we are reluctant to imply such an action without legislative authority. The court said that we know how to provide such authority when we want to. Thus, S9 explicitly provides the state auditor with the authority to audit the performance of contracts with the state. What we're doing is using our authority as the legislative branch to explicitly provide this authority to a state constitutional officer. So let's turn to the language of the bill, which you can find on page 150 of today's calendar. Section 1 adds contractors to the list of entities that the auditor is authorized to audit, along with state agencies and departments and local government entities that receive or disperse state funds. This authority that is granted under S9, however, is limited to the performance of the contract with the state, and that's an important distinction. Not the entire scope of activities, records, or transactions of the contracting entity, just the performance of the contract with the state. Section 1 also adds the discretion to audit state contractors to the list of duties for the state auditor. This section provides the auditor authority to examine the records, accounts, books, papers, reports, and returns, again as related to the performance of a contract with the state. This list of documents that can be examined mirrors the language for information available to the auditor for state and local governments. It is not new, it is the same language that is already in there for the auditor's authority to audit other entities. Section 2 amends the type of records that are available for audit to include the more limited scope of materials from contractors that are available to the audit, meaning that for state agencies and departments and local governments, all such records must be made available, but for contractors, only those limited to the performance of the contract. Again, I repeat that. Section 3 requires the Secretary of Administration to amend the aforementioned Bulletin 3.5, which again is the procurement and contracting procedures, to authorize the auditor to have the discretion to perform an audit of a contractor based on the performance of a contract with the state. Bulletin 3.5 includes substantial authority for the Secretary of Administration to waive requirements of Bulletin 3.5, and nothing in S9 would prevent the Secretary from working with the auditor's office to outline such a waiver for auditing requirements under a state contract if a contractor expresses concerns about the audit requirement. Again, the Secretary of Administration could work with the auditor to waive some of the audit requirements if a contractor wanted to negotiate such a waiver. And because current procedures already require documentation and potential audit, the provisions of S9 would not impose any additional administrative burden on state contractors. Section 4 of the bill adds an exception to the laws governing the release of financial records by banks and other financial institutions to regulatory agencies to permit the disclosure of financial records to the auditor, again, as relevant to the performance of the contract of the state. This was a provision that was requested by the Bankers Association to ensure that they would not be, that financial institutions and banks would not be violating federal law by providing financial records to the auditor. The bill would take effect on July 1st, 2023. Mr. President, it's important to note that the auditor, like all state officials, is required to follow the Public Records Act. Thus, information obtained by the auditor is not otherwise publicly available under the Public Records Act would be exempt from the Public Records Act, including tax returns, personnel records, trade secrets and confidential business records, records related to contract negotiations, and medical records as covered by HIPAA. All draft audit records are also confidential and exempt from public inspection. In other words, Mr. President, the auditor would not be able to publicly release confidential materials. Confidential materials would remain confidential by law. While not all states have a state auditor in the same way that Vermont does, at least 12 other states that do have a state auditor position explicitly authorize the state auditor to audit state contracts, including both Massachusetts and New York, as well as such states as Texas, North Carolina, and Iowa. Thus, such authority is neither unique nor partisan. According to JFO, in FY22, the state spent approximately $530 million through contracts, or 6.7% of the $7.9 billion of all budgeted funds. This is not an insignificant amount of public funds to be spent outside the scope of the state auditor's authority to examine whether public funds were appropriately spent based on the parameters of the contract, particularly for contracts that directly impact the lives of Vermonters. Like, for example, a contract for the management of all healthcare spending in our state. It's important for the state auditor to have the discretion to perform an audit, particularly if concerns have been raised about the expenditures of such funds. It's important to note that the bill would provide the auditor the discretion to complete audits on the performance of contracts with the state. It would not require the audit to audit any specific contract or type of entity. Currently, the auditor performs a limited number of discretionary audits, and there's no reason to believe that all or even most contracts would be audited. In addition, because these audits would be based on the performance of a contract, the state agency or department that issued the contract and worked with the contractor would be involved in the audit process directly. Contractors are already subject to state audit under Bulletin 3.5, so the provisions of S9 would dovetail with an existing oversight system. Finally, this bill is about the office of the auditor, not the current auditor. As we all know, statutes are enduring until we change them. Thus, this language would certainly outlast the current auditor and better ensure that contractors are providing good and cost-effective services to the state for the long run. This is about ensuring public taxpayer funding is spent appropriately, efficiently, and effectively. It's about ensuring public trust of state government and the money we spend to provide government services. Mr. President, we heard from a number of witnesses, including 2 of our alleged counsel attorneys, to make sure that we are covering all the bases with the Public Records Act and the financial oversight. We heard from the Bankers Association, the Healthcare Advocate, the Department of Buildings and General Services, the Hospitals Association, of course, the Auditor's Office, the Associated General Contractors of Vermont, the Agency of Transportation, and the Joint Fiscal Office. Mr. President, the vote in committee was 5-1-0, and the Government Operations Committee asks for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator from Madison. The question is, shall the Senate amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, first I want to thank the Government Operations Committee for delaying this bill for institutions to take a peek at it. I never really thought that I would have any interest in this bill, other than the fact that once it was reported out, my phone started to blow up from a lot of people that do business with the state. And seeing how the 2 committees I'm involved with, as chairs of institutions and transportation, most of our work that we do is in the bid process. In fact, we learned yesterday that out of $8.4 billion budget, at 14% of all of that budget at 8.4 is bid work. We're suffering right now in both of those committees to make sure that we have enough bidders within this state. We have bids, we have projects that are getting bid over and over and over because we're only getting one bidder. The people that were calling really seem to think that this bill does more than what it proposes. They're telling us that it goes deeper than whatever went before, and there's real fear. And I think that's the thing that really shocked us the most, is that as people were talking about this, and as people were talking to me about it, they were just really, really, really fearful. And a lot of the folks that were there said, I just don't do enough with the state. The state is hard to do business with as it is. We like the work, we like all of that, but we're just inclined not to bid anymore because of this bill. So I don't know, where that's coming from. But I can tell you, in my personal life or business life, I can overcome any objection that comes before me. I can't overcome fear. And we just wrestled with this in our committee over and over and over, and we could feel that the fear was real. We could feel that, we couldn't really get the people in there that we'd really like. We would have liked to have got the contractors in there, but we got the people that represent the contractors in there. And we just kept going around and around and around, just trying to figure out, what we could do. And I think we really come to the agreement that it would be nice to get the auditor and the people that are fearful and get them in the same room and just try to figure out what the heck is going on here. But we could just never get to that point. I respect the amount of time that we were given. I respect that we were able to look at this bill. But the deeper we got into it, the more questions that we had. I respect the timeline that the pro tem and the chair of government operations worked out with us so that we could look at this bill. But I just feel that because we have more questions that really never got answered, I just can't support this bill at this time. I couldn't say that I wouldn't be able to support it if we had more time and we could work through these issues. But as of right now, I'm going to have to be a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to note that we did hold this bill so that 2 other committees could take a look at this bill, and I have had conversations with representatives of the administration as recently as just an hour and a half ago, and asked if they had any suggestions to improve the bill. And in fact, they do not, Mr. President. They are just against the bill. They are not trying to find a way to make the bill work. And as it is right now, they do not feel like the auditor should have access to audit records of the state as they pertain to state contractors, which I think is a particularly difficult and problematic stance to take given the amount of public taxpayer money that is used in state contracts. And so while I understand that the chair of the Institutions Committee has concerns, I don't think that it's fair to represent those concerns as fears. I think that there is concern that the administration is whipping up in a way that is inappropriate.
Senator from Essex.
We talk about fear in this chamber a lot. We talked about fear a while ago about some judges, and we talked about that. And I think the biggest thing that I'd hate to see is I'd hate to see the BIPOC community and some of these people that really don't get a chance to bid on these state contracts much, but it's very valuable to them. I'd hate to see that the BIPOC community or people just starting to get their businesses going, people that a state contract every 1 or 2 or 3 years could really make a difference to their businesses and really put them on the map and let them feel like it's part of the process. But the fear was real, and that's all I can say. We talked about it over and over and over in our committee. We felt it ourselves, and so it was real. And but again, thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. As someone who has had the mostly pleasure of serving as state auditor in the past, I looked at this bill carefully. And as you know, there's a phrase that I've used before, that there are 5 constitutional officers in the state of Vermont, and the job of the auditor is to protect you from the other 4. And it's a full-time job. Now, part of that protection also is to protect the Vermont taxpayer from fraud, error, waste, and theft. It's to ensure that we get full value for the money that we spend, and a lot of that money is spent on contractors. The notion of extending this kind of scrutiny and allowing the auditor to examine contractors sounds at first blush something strange or unusual. But we've had a provision like that in Bulletin 3.5, which is the bulletin that deals with contracting, as long as I can remember. We haven't really used it very much, or perhaps at all, until the attempt to use it in the case that created the Supreme Court decision. But it's been there in terms of the intent all along for government to be able to take a look at these kinds of things. And it's not unusual. Quite a number of states have this provision already, so that their auditors can do these kinds of examinations. So it's not strange. Maybe scary. And fear is a factor. And that's a job that the auditor has, of making sure that the message goes across that our job as auditors is not to catch you doing something wrong. It's to help you do things the right way. That's the principal function of an audit and an audit process. This is also not unusual in the private sector. Large corporations, the one for which I worked for many years, we had that routinely in contracts with vendors, that we had the ability to audit using our own staff or contracted auditors certain parts of their operations that were directly relevant to the contract. And that, again, is important. And so as I looked at this bill, I looked for 2 things in terms of guardrail. And guardrails are critically important in terms of what we tell people to do. The first guardrail is that the audit work and the access that the auditor has to be in a project done under generally accepted government auditing standards. And what those standards say, among other things, is it provides for a methodology and some basic standards of audit. And one of those standards is that the work papers that the auditor produces should be able to be picked up by any other qualified audit professional. And they should come to the same conclusion and the same results. And it's designed to prevent bias, and it's designed to prevent reports that don't meet the standard of generally accepted government auditing standards. That is contained in this particular bill. The second is the guardrail of limiting what the auditor has access to. And in this case, the bill limits it to access to those things that are relevant to the contract with the state. And then thirdly, it contains some confidentiality provisions, meaning that what the auditor looks at is not a public record under the Public Records Act, and is maintained as confidential. In some cases, those are judgment issues that often are resolved, most times are resolved pretty simply. They could result in litigation, that's always possible. But it's not that this audit provision comes as a surprise to people who have been signing contracts with the state for years. It's been there. It just got affected by the Supreme Court decision, and what this does is it clarifies it and it makes it clear so that no one can mistake the intent. I'm always hesitant to add an audit provision because, again, it may give fear to some people who, in terms of what may be looked at, but on balance, I think the guardrails are there, and as a result, I support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Again, the question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? I'd like to recognize the senior senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's very difficult to stand up and speak after the senator from Franklin, and our former auditor, who was very eloquent in his presentation about the bill. The Senate Health and Welfare did have an opportunity to have the administration, agency of administration in this morning, as well as the Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General responsible for the Agency of Human Services, as well as the presenter of the bill, Senator Hardy, who is on the committee. And we also had in the deputy auditor in to meet with us to answer concerns that we have heard from our folks who are either independent providers or concerns from organizations within the healthcare world. And of course, when we left that encounter and the testimony, I, for one, still have concerns about the resolution of the debate that I heard between the Agency of Administration and I think the auditor and the auditor's office. So there are some unanswered questions for us regarding the extent to which individual organizations, individual providers who are on contracts with our Agency of Human Services or others might be audited and investigated. And I will say, you know, I hear the word fear and everybody is saying this is based on fear, but as we took testimony, it became clear that there is a difference of opinion about what and I will yield, of course, to Senator Hardy's position on this. She's heard much more testimony than we have. But there was the debate at the end that looked at what is meant by an allowance of a waiver within the bulletin. And I'm still not clear on what that means. And I don't know what that means for folks who are contracted by the state. I do know that in the Agency of Human Services, we have at any given time, we heard that there are between 1,000 and 1,500 contracts out there. We know that there are some very private organizations that do have private information and protected information, HIPAA information. Of course, that will be allowed to go to the auditor's office, and there is an insurance and a guardrail that we've heard about protecting that confidential information, and yet it's at the auditor's office. And it perhaps would be the auditor's discretion about how that information is released or utilized. Now, we were very much informed by the current auditor about the care that the auditor takes in this kind of, and would take in this kind of audit for smaller organizations. But there is a concern going forward. And there is a concern about audits or investigations into specific kinds of organizations. And I think that the senator from Orleans mentioned BIPOC, and that was mentioned and brought up in committee, where, you know, we do not want to see discrimination take place whenever folks are audited. We've been reassured about that wouldn't happen. That's not in legislation. So I guess I offer my comments because my sense is that at least in the area of health, care, and welfare, there are still questions. But the question, the question really is, how can the Agency of Administration and the Auditor's Office get together and have a conversation and bring us a resolution? Now, the senator from Addison has indicated that the AOA, the Agency of Administration, is reluctant to do that. Nevertheless, I think that's an important conversation for us to encourage and for those folks to get together and to ensure that if we pass this bill and if it goes into law, that we do have the guardrails that the senator from Franklin has brought forth. So, Mr. President, as some of you know, this isn't my favorite bill, and having taken testimony, and I'm not on GovOps, so I can't answer all the questions that others might be able to answer. It's still not my favorite bill. So I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? I would remind the senator from...
Just have a question.
Point of information.
Are we voting on the amendment or the whole bill?
We are at this point on the amendment.
Okay.
Just a reminder to folks that we do have a rule about how many times someone speaks other than the reporter of the bill. With that said, I'll repeat the question. The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you have amended the bill as recommended by the Committee on Government Operations. The question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question?
Roll call, please.
A roll call has been requested. If you are ready for that question, I would direct the secretary to call the roll.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
No.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
No.
Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershlick.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
Yes.
Senator Bihovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Please listen to the results of your vote. The yeas are 23, the nays 6, and you have passed ordered third reading of S9. We have on the calendar for action S5, introduced on January 6th. It was referred to the Committee on Natural Resources, which reports it has considered the bill and recommends that the bill be amended as set forth in the calendar for today at page 152, and that when so amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill was then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which reports it has considered the bill and recommends that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S5. An act relating to affordably meeting the mandated greenhouse gas reductions for the thermal sector through electrification, decarbonization, efficiency, and weatherization measures.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. I'd like to recognize the senator from Addison, Senator Bray, for the report of the Committee on Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, today I'm reporting S5, an act relating to affordably meeting the mandated greenhouse gas reductions for the thermal sector through electrification, decarbonization, efficiency, and weatherization measures. The bill and the amending report offered by the Senate Appropriations Committee also be offered. appear in the Senate calendar beginning on page 152. I would ask that the Senate Secretary distribute the handout. That's already happening. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I rise to speak with you today with great humility because I have never felt I know the absolute truth. I also rise with great respect because I know I'm just one modest legislator passing briefly through this institution with its 250-year history. And I also rise with determination because my oath of office requires me to do my best for every Vermonter, and this bill and the plan of work it entails is, in my honest assessment, in the best interest of all Vermonters, including those who use fuel and those who do not. In every generation, there are a handful of major policy issues that transcend all others. For our generation, one such issue is to stop taking our planet for granted and to start caring for it as though our lives and the lives of our children depend upon it, because they do. The public narrative around this bill is simply wrong and misleading. And if there's one thing in this entire scenario that makes me angry and a bit disappointed, it is that various interested parties have whipped up the public, creating fear and misunderstanding. Our job as elected officials requires us to step out of that whirlwind of propaganda and emotion and think clearly, dispassionately, logically, and responsibly. And one of our responsibilities is to follow the law. And one of the laws we must honor is Act 153 of 2020, also known as the Global Warming Solutions Act, under which Vermont has an obligation to reduce fossil fuel emissions. With all due respect to my colleagues, I cannot understand how we can fill our oath of office and ignore the law. What we will achieve through action, the action contemplated in this bill, none of us can say with precision at this point in time prior to conducting all the work that S5 entails. But there is no uncertainty around the outcome if we fail to act. Vermonters will continue to pollute, to fail to meet emission requirements, and to be subject to record high fuel prices with no end in sight, and without S5, no comprehensive program to help them reduce and manage those costs. S5, especially as modified by the changes that will shortly be presented by the Appropriations Committee, manages that uncertainty and allows us to bring forward S5 our best thinking and a good faith effort to meet the legal mandate we operate under. More concretely and immediately, there are also compelling reasons to act. Vermonters are facing a heating emergency. All of us, all our constituents who heat primarily with heating oil or gas are seeing record high prices for the second winter in a row. These inflated prices have cost Vermonters an extra $650 million in just 2 years. That is more than $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the state. Our heavy reliance on price-volatile fossil fuels has left many Vermonters struggling to pay their fuel bills, left them turning down their thermostats, layering up even at home, and living in uncomfortable conditions. If you look at the handout that's on your desk, you can see the story in numbers, as developed by the Department of Public Service in their 2023 Annual Energy Report. Figure A shows the relative cost of different heating fuels measured against delivering the same amount of heat. As you can see on the right side of the figure, propane, fuel oil, and kerosene are the most expensive delivered fuels. And figure B demonstrates not only how expensive heating fuel is, you can look at the red line there, compared to cold climate heat pumps, for instance, see the brown line, but also how volatile the price is. As it is based on a global market that Vermont has absolutely no influence over, whereas cold climate heat pumps, again, for instance, run on electricity, which is regulated in Vermont, so we can deliver stable, predictable, and manageable pricing. Our fossil fuel use also comes with a second cost, damage to our environment. Vermont has the highest level of greenhouse gas pollution per person in the Northeast. We are not as green as we might hope or think. And Vermonters, who are rightly proud of our many commitments over the decades to protect the beautiful environment we call home, want to do better and reduce pollution. In fact, our own laws requires us to do better. We can take steps to save money and reduce pollution, or we can passively accept the status quo. The Vermont I know and admire, when facing a challenge, always looks forward and finds new and better ways of doing things. The Affordable Heat Act, which this bill proposes to develop into a mature plan, lays out a new and better way. The program, operating over the next 30 years, will help us wean ourselves from expensive, price-volatile fossil fuels and increasingly use cleaner biofuels and cleanly generated electricity to warm and even cool our homes and businesses. The Affordable Heat Act will also, according to the Scott administration's Climate Action Office, save Vermonters an estimated $6.4 billion. What is holding us back? Fear and misinformation. Fear is natural. We can work through this by patiently learning together how to do things in new ways. And misinformation is best addressed by correcting the record, using balanced and accurate information, not just the information circulated by parties with vested interests. Let's also pause to ask ourselves, who benefits from the status quo and record high fuel prices? Not Vermonters. With no fossil fuel industry in Vermont, 75 cents of every dollar we spend on these fuels leaves our state. The high prices we are paying right now for fuels ultimately go to global oil companies that are currently reporting an astounding record earnings, $200 billion in just 2022. Meanwhile, our local fuel dealers get no share of these windfall profits, and working Vermonters, retirees, and fixed income families are stuck paying high prices. Of course, big oil has never wanted you to question their profits. Meanwhile, as you are painfully aware, Vermonters are being barraged with messages that divert their attention from the high costs we're experiencing today and tells us to worry instead about the unverified future price impacts of an Affordable Heat Act. There is messaging that makes unsubstantiated, inaccurate claims, and the claims are making many Vermonters understandably anxious, and they are expressing their concerns. Members of the committee and I have been listening carefully to our constituents and their concerns, as have many of you. And as a result, in concert with the Senate Appropriations Committee, we are supporting revising the bill to address these concerns. The bill is voted out of committee set us off on a 2-year development project to create the details of a plan to reduce emissions and save Vermonters money. Again, as already noted, the best, most professional estimate we have, the one produced on the administration's Climate Action Office, estimates those savings as $6.4 billion through the year 2050. But let's be direct and honest about this. That is an estimate. Some constituents, meanwhile, have asked us, what will it cost me to achieve these savings? When will I see net savings if I make these investments? These are compelling questions, and so we have altered course. Rather than put us on a course whereby the default, if no legislative action took place in 2025, would see the implementation of the plan in 2026, we are now agreeing to a full stop after the development of the plan. That plan will then be reviewed by a future legislature, and they will have the option to act, to implement the plan as presented perhaps, or perhaps to modify it and then act. And the action required to implement any plan at all is a full vote of the General Assembly. Some people are referring to this as a check-back vote. I regard it as a prudent vote that will that will enable all sides to better understand the implications of the Affordable Heat Act. That future legislature will be able to provide answers to the compelling constituent questions I just shared. and that legislature will better know what the savings are. To reiterate, as amended, S5 will, over the next 2 years, through a detailed plan of work conducted by the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service, research a clean heat program in detail and carefully assess its design, implementation, and costs. But the bill does not take the program live. That step will now require a vote of the full legislature in 2025 after the study is complete. We are assuming nothing. We are evaluating everything, and we will not proceed until we have solid analysis to ensure that the program will do just what we intend it to do: save Vermonters money while also reducing emissions. When we are ready to proceed, here's what we stand to gain. We can assert our energy independence and loosen the grip of global oil companies by going local, investing in weatherization and conservation, installing heating appliances powered by clean electricity, and using sustainably harvested wood and biofuels. The electricity, wood, and biofuels can be produced here, not halfway around the world. Our goal is to make the transition to clean energy as affordable as possible for all Vermonters, with special money savings provisions for low and moderate income Vermonters who are currently feeling the sting of high energy costs. Big oil is not going to help us. We are going to have to help ourselves. So here's our choice. We can stay shackled to costly polluting fossil fuels, our past, or we can pass the Affordable Heat Act and start working out the details of a plan to transition to clean, locally produced energy, our future. The Vermont I know will look forward and think smart, and I and many others look forward to doing this work with you. Or put another way, a yes vote today tells your constituents that you are willing to look into the potential to save them $6.4 billion. A no vote means you are unwilling to examine whether or not this potential savings, as documented by the administration's Climate Action Office, are worth exploring. Let's not let this opportunity slip away through inaction. Would like to turn to the bill itself and just present a very brief outline, as so much of the real work would lie ahead in a detailed review in a future legislature. But the bill is as currently offered. Section 1 is a short title, followed by Section 2 with findings. Section 3 lays out a program referred to as the Clean Heat Standard. It works through the intent of the section, the standard itself, its definitions, compliance mechanisms, and a default delivery agent for delivering them. And a note while we're passing by this spot that in that section, it requires an initial potential study conducted by the Department of Service to include a quantifications of available thermal resources, thermal market conditions, and statewide and regional thermal workforce characteristics. So I'm going to call that out as report number 1. In the next section, 8126, we define rulemaking in detail. Rulemaking, as you may well know, includes an economic impact analysis. So that is report 2. In 8127, we define tradable clean heat credits. In 8128, a technical advisory group is created. In 8129, the Clean Heat Standard Equity Advisory Group is created. Here's a third report. It includes reports by the Equity Group to the PUC to protect low and moderate income Vermonters, including actions needed to provide customers with better service and mitigate the fuel price impacts calculated in an earlier section of the bill. 8130 is a severability provision. That takes us to section 4, which relates to a technical amendment to the current greenhouse gas inventory process. Section 5 deals with tax records. And section 6 lays out in brief the protocol at the Public Utility Commission for implementation, namely commencement, use of a facilitator, a public engagement process, advertising to ensure a broad notice to the public, draft proposed rules, final rules, use of consultants as needed, funding for the program, and check back reports, 2 of which, so now it's the reports 4 and 5. They come in 2024 and 2025, and those include, quote, to the extent available, estimates of the impact of the clean heat standard on customers, including impact on customer rates and fuel bills for participating and non-participating customers, net impacts on total spending on energy for thermal sector end uses, fossil fuel reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and if possible, impacts on economic activity and employment. Section J offers assistance in that process. Section 7 is the appropriations for the bill, which the Appropriations Committee will detail, and Section 8 is an effective date. So again, as amended, the bill creates a highly researched plan of work to be examined by a future legislature. I paused in this report to call out 5 reports that are going to help detail the impacts of that program. I want to, in closing, return to witnesses. I'm not going to read the list because we had 56 of them, but I can assure you it was a broad range of people from the fuel industry, from administration, interested parties, citizens, advocacy groups, you name it. I'm happy to share that list with you. I've been on my feet for a long time. I don't think people want to hear 56 names read off. I also want to thank the committee for 7 weeks of steady work on this bill, from the opening day of the session, in fact. And the departments in state government, especially the PUC, which worked with us relentlessly on reviewing and retuning language. And then especially I want to recognize our attorney, Ellen Chakowski, who by my count worked through 14 drafts of this bill, with the first draft being written in July. The committee vote was 5-0-0, and we ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator from Madison. I'd like to recognize the Senator from Caledonia, Senator Kitchell, for the report of the Committee on Appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we getting feedback?
No, you sound fine.
Well, it's not so fine on my end. I'm getting the echo. I'll do the best I can.
Senator from Caledonia, if you'd like, we can try to take a quick recess and get you into a proper frame.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
Okay, I'll declare just a minute's recess. If senators could remain in their seats, we'll try to bring the Senator from Caledonia into a better reception. Senate will come back to order. I believe we have a better reception for the senator from Caledonia. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think whatever the issue was has been resolved. The amendment by your Senate Appropriations Committee has 11 instances of amendment. The first two are check back. 3 is to add language to make sure we're maximizing federal funds. 4 through 8 are provisions that we did in consultation with the Natural Resources Committee to respond to the comments offered by the Office of Racial Equity. 9 and 10 relate to the budget sections and appropriations, which we changed, and 11 adds reference to how funds can be used. As the presenter of the bill has indicated, there are many concerns that have been raised. Obviously, for the general public who might be listening, there is concern about the impact of what this bill does and does not do. So the first 2 instances of amendments put in place, one has been called the check back requirement. And that what this means is that the General Assembly is required to take action to specifically authorize program rules before any action to implement the clean heat standard can occur. Certainly the bill puts forth a strategy to reduce thermal emissions through this concept, but there are many questions, concerns, and even misinformation that have emerged that we feel must be sufficiently addressed and understood before moving forward with any implementation effort. The bill sets forth a timeline for the Public Utility Commission to submit its proposed program in January of 2025. Therefore, with this check back language, between now and 2025, or when the legislature takes affirmative action, nothing will happen except the required technical and analytical work. In short, the intent of the first 2 instances of amendment is to ensure that no action to implement this standard can occur without the full legislature reviewing and authorizing whatever plan is put forward as a result of the study and analyses of the Public Service Department and the Public Service Commission. This check back requirement will allow for a more detailed understanding of the standard and provide a robust debate, additional testimony, and a vote by the full legislature in a subsequent session. Obviously, any bill would then be subject to the veto by the sitting governor at that time. It is conceivable that after a full and careful examination of this heat standard concept and completion of the required analyses by energy experts, that what is envisioned in S5 needs to be modified or even abandoned. This is what the due diligence of a future legislature demands. So let me go through the provisions of the amendment section by section. The first instance of amendment is on rulemaking authority, and this is where the check back requirement is referenced, and that is, let me read, shall not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. And then there's the date, on or before January 15, 2025, the Commission shall submit to the General Assembly final proposed rules to implement the clean heat standard, but they cannot file, they shall not file the final proposed rules until specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. So what we're doing here is allowing the study of this concept, which in fact, as was referenced, is included in the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan completed by the executive branch, calling for formal consideration of this standard. But because it's so new and there's so many unknown questions, This seems to be the prudent course to take. We are concerned that there are statements being made that the bill will increase your fuel by so much per gallon, but that is not what this bill does, and it's important that we make that clear because that has been a source of great consternation on the part of many Vermonters. On the next, in that section are those instances of amendment. We're having to crosswalk the Administrative Procedure Act requirement with this different process of rulemaking that is set forth in this checkback section. So that what you can see, sections of the APA are being waived because they are either redundant to the process established in F5 or not relevant to this type of rule. The other third amendment, we know that under the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, there are billions of dollars available to help advance the reduction in thermal emissions, and we want to make sure that any plan that is developed it maximizes the use of these funds to the extent possible. Now, sections, the fourth and eighth instances of amendment are the provisions that are to reflect the comments from the Office of Racial Equity. The fifth, sixth, and seventh. It just makes it very clear that customer income data shall be kept confidential and by the Commission and the Public Service Department, obligated parties, and other entities that deliver deeply clean heat measures. And there's also the requirement that the Commission shall invite organizations and communities recommended by the Equity Advisory Committee to participate in the public hearings and opportunity to comment. There's also what was recommended by, in the sixth instance of amendment, by striking out the word "three" and in lieu of replacing the word "full bore." And that was their recommendation to make sure that any penalty for non-compliance is not such minimal amount that it would just be incorporated into the cost of doing business. So as I've indicated, the 4th through 8th instances of amendment are specifically related to comments from the Office of Racial Equity. The 9th instance of amendment and the 10th relate to in the appropriations that come with this bill. One of the, in the testimony, one thing that we discovered is that there was not funding included in the version that passed out of the Natural Resources Committee to fund what is called a potential study. And if I may read from Secretary Moore's description of a potential study, Mr. President.
Without objection.
A potential study is typically the first step taken in developing or expanding a portfolio of energy efficiency programs. It serves as an analytic basis for evaluating technical, economic, and achievable potential. Technical potential is the theoretical maximum energy use, and it goes on. It talks about economic potential, achievable potential, but most important, it provides an analysis of the rate and the bill impact, setting attainable targets, which is certainly a concern, and supporting programs designed to achieve long-term potential. In many of the comments, there's concern, obviously, the technology around our climate and heat pumps, that perhaps our targets are not aligned at this point with the state of technology. But this is what the potential study will provide. It is really a critical first step that should inform all of the subsequent work. And so your Appropriations Committee is adding funding for this critical study, and this would go to the Public Service Department, and they also indicated that there would be an additional need for consultation from experts in the field. So the total appropriation for the Department of Public Service is now $900,000. For the Public Utility Commission, we did also have in comments from the Office of Racial Equity concerned that there would be translation costs that were not recognized, and therefore we addressed the need for translation. We also recognized that the comment that was made that the per diems of the standard $50 a day might not be sufficient. As this body may recollect, last year we actually passed legislation that does allow the payment of a higher per diem if it can be justified. So we do recognize that that need might be to pay a higher per diem is there, but there is already the authority to do so. So the appropriation that is included in this recommendation is the $825,000 for the Public Utility Commission. The vote in committee on the amendment itself was 7-0-0. We took testimony from Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, Julie Moore. We also took testimony from Commissioner June Tierney of the Public Service Department. It is with their recommended funding that we are reflecting in our amendment as well. One of the things that I think we all recognize is if we're moving forward, it is important to do it thoughtfully, do it well, and make sure the resources that have been requested, in fact, are in place. The vote in committee on S5 as amended was 4-3. Thank you, Mr. President. We hope the body will concur with the Appropriations Committee amendment to S5.
Thank you, Senator from Caledonia. The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for their hard work on this, and I hope that all senators will support this and conclude that no matter what your position on this bill prior to the amendment, that now we have a prudent course of action that everyone can support. Our committee reviewed the amendment and urges the body to vote for it. Our committee vote was 5-0-0.
So a reminder that we are voting on amending S5 at this point. So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the Chair of Appropriations?
Chair of Appropriations will be interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I read the amendment looking at Section 1, it refers exclusively to rulemaking authority. Am I correct in interpreting this, that this places a limitation on rulemaking authority relative to this, but it does not have anything to do with the other aspects of the underlying bill, including its prescriptions and trajectory?
Thank you, Mr. President. That is true. However, by then we would have the result of the potential study, and that would help a future legislature make a determination whether, in fact, the underlying language that's in S5 needs to be modified, or whether the concept, as I said before, is not viable, or needs to not only not be modified, but in fact, a different approach might be determined. So yes, we are really dealing with the rulemaking and saying nothing goes forward.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so then I interpret this, the trajectory of the work in the underlying bill before the amendment would continue unimpeded, and they would do the same things in the same way that they would otherwise, and that they do not essentially have the authority or direction to come up with alternative solutions or things that may be entirely different than creating the clean heat standard with the credits and other mechanisms in the underlying bill. Is that correct?
Would you please restate that? I apologize, I'm still somewhat of a COVID fog here.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that in terms of the activities contemplated by this amendment, everything would continue to be done in the way it was done in the underlying bill in terms of what steps have to be taken, what measures have to be taken. They just simply can't be incorporated into a final rule, but this would proceed unimpeded otherwise. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would defer to the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, but I would believe that the interim report would give some indication around the viability of this concept as moving forward as before January of 2025. So yes, the study and the analysis that are required to explore the clean heat standard as indicated in the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan would move forward. So that planning and that analytical work around this concept, yes, would continue. That is true. However, I would hope that the potential study, which would be undertaken by the administration, if in fact the results and findings of that study indicate that there needs to be significant modifications, I would anticipate that those findings would be brought back to the legislature for further consideration and recalibration as we look at what S5 is putting forward in its current version.
Then, as I look at section regarding final rules, the only thing that is being placed on hold here is the implementation of final rules. But what the underlying bill requires to be done remains unchanged. It's simply it's the implementing rules that are being held up and nothing more. The concept of what's being done remains unchanged.
That, Mr. President, is the case because what the bill intends to do is examine the feasibility or the development of the concept of the clean heat standard. And so that work, and assuming that that concept has validity, yes, that's what is reflected here, moving forward on that plan. But between now and or when this work begins, and in different points between now and or when this work starts in January 25, there would be that opportunity to circle back with additional information and additional findings for recommended legislative action. So yes, it does initiate the ability to do the analysis and the study. It funds the potential study. And yes, the way the check back works is if at the end, the proposed rules, which would be the framework for a program to be implemented, is not to the satisfaction and cannot stand the scrutiny of that legislature in session at the time, then nothing would move forward without specific legislative authority as to what would or would not move forward.
I thank the chair of Appropriations for her input. As I read this, essentially, there is the only limitation here is on the adoption of rules to implement what the underlying bill has asked for, and assent to either means that we are effectively assenting to the underlying bill structure regarding clean heat credits and other mechanisms that are contained in the underlying bill. It is simply the implementation that is being delayed. And presumably there is a yes or no vote required by a future legislature regarding the specifics of the rules, but not of the underlying concepts here that we appear to be assenting to. And that concerns me. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you have amended the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations. The question is, now shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? I would recognize the senator from Washington, Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to further illustrate the two problems that this bill aims to solve. The first problem is that Vermonters who heat with fossil fuels are at the mercy of the fossil fuel industry, and as a result are paying into the industry's record-breaking profits. Just as an example, in 2022, Chevron doubled their 2021 profits. Simultaneously, the war in Ukraine has changed large-scale demands for oil, which makes it clear that the price of oil is far beyond our control. In just 2 short years, the price of fuel oil has gone up more than $2 a gallon, resulting in Vermonters cumulatively paying hundreds of millions more for heating fuel, 72% of which leaves the state immediately, since we import 100% of those fossil fuels. I point my fellow senators to a graph. There's a statement being passed out right now that's op-ed that I've submitted. On the back of it is a graph. It's very similar to one passed out by the senator from Addison that compares different prices of fuels, their prices per MMBTU, which is millions of British thermal units, or a unit for heat energy. From that graph, you can see that propane, kerosene, and fuel oil all track together and have been extremely price volatile over the last 20 years. You'll also notice that more renewable forms of energy, wood pellets, wood chips, and heat pumps, are comparatively much cheaper and much less volatile. So the first problem is that fossil fuel heating is expensive, and the solution is obvious. We need to get Vermont off of the fossil fuel roller coaster and onto cheaper, more renewable forms of heat. This leads to the second problem. The upfront costs to switch to fuels that reduce the second problem, which is the upfront cost to switch fuels or to reduce demand through weatherization. That has been a barrier for many families. This bill is designed to bring down those upfront costs to a rate that is accessible for all. This is the purpose of the credit market described in this bill. Since installations and carbon reductions are required both across the board and in low and moderate income homes, the market will find the rates that are realistic for low income homes and moderate income homes and all of us. We all stand to benefit from this bill as we all progressively get off of oil. We'll end up keeping more money within the state and in our own pocketbooks. The economic analysis that we have for this program shows that Vermonters will realize a net savings of at least $2 billion by 2030, or $7,500 per household on average over the life of the equipment. The sooner we can make this transition, the sooner we insulate ourselves from the wild swings of the fossil fuel market and start saving money. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the bill as amended, the question is, should the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Orleans.
Yes, may I inquire the reporter of the main bill?
The reporter will be interrogated.
This bill's designed to be a clean heat standards bill, I believe. And my question is, what fuels will be affected by passage of this bill?
By passage of this bill, in fact, no fuels will be affected. It is a plan of action to be brought forward to a future legislature, and the full impacts of the bill can be clearly expressed then. But at this point, we're not enacting the clean heat standard. I can also tell you that we address fossil fuels in the bill. I don't know if you have a particular question about it. Maybe the shortest answer I can give, other than to remind us all that we're creating a plan, we're not implementing a plan as per our amendment just offered by Appropriations. But the heating fuels that are part of the examination in that plan are defined as fossil-based heating fuels, including oil, propane, natural gas, coal, and kerosene.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're only talking...
That would be Mr. President.
Pardon?
Mr. President.
Mr. President, wouldn't want to put you down. So, Mr. President, could the member tell me in section 3, if you look at section 3 and go down to page 156 on 3 parentheses A parentheses, and explain to me why this is in the bill when the bill's only pertaining to heating fuels for homes and businesses?
3A is a provision that has the Department of Tax providing information to the Public Utility Commission, and that is because heating fuels are already subject to a sales tax. And when that tax is remitted, it creates a record at the Department of Tax of who is out there selling fuels. In order to assist the PUC in tracking that marketplace, we direct the Department of Tax to share that information with the PUC so that they can make sure that their list is complete and up to date.
Mr. President, could you explain making sure the record is complete? Because the way I read this, it looks to me like fuel that farmers buy to run their equipment would be part of this list that would be sent from the tax department or from somebody to the PUC?
Thank you for that question, because there's also work entailed at the Department of Tax to segregate. They currently, when they report their excise tax on fuel, it's aggregated into a single figure. And one of the other provisions is to break fuels out by type so that they can be distinguished.
And Mr. President, could you explain why aviation fuel, jet fuel, is not listed in this category?
Because this bill, as noted in the definition section, relates to thermal fuels and the thermal sector. That's definition 13. Definition 13 has the same meaning as the residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use sector as used in the Vermont Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory and Forecast, and that is for residential, commercial, and industrial use, which not includes airplanes.
So, Mr. President, from what I've heard, there's no worry about the next villain in this issue of climate cases, agriculture and forestry will not be affected in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, so again, so we're talking about heating fuels being used in the thermal sector.
So
exclusively.
just for buildings?
But again, heating fuels in the thermal sector, which is residential, commercial, and industrial buildings.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. So the way I look at this, our hospitals, schools, our homes, our businesses, everybody is going to be affected that heats their buildings with number 2 fuel or liquid gas or propane. But one thing maybe positive is farmers and forestry people will not be included, but yet they still burn fossil fuels. And aviation probably here in Vermont uses more fuel than our farmers put together, but they're not listed in this report or this bill in any way, shape, or form. And the other issue that you think about is that, you know, aren't we getting the cart a little bit in front of the horse? So, because we're going to do all these studies, but basically we have the bill sitting in front of us all drafted. Sure, the rules we've got to approve, or not us, but the new legislature in 2025. But it's certainly an indication that we're ahead of our time. And, you know, and we're voting on what you'd also say is a pig in poke, because we've got these people doing all these studies that we haven't seen, have no idea how they're going to turn out, but yet we're being asked to vote for this particular issue. And, you know, with town meeting coming up here in just a few days, I'm sure most all of you have attended those meetings from one time or another, or probably you wouldn't be here. But would you walk into your town meeting next Tuesday and vote for a school budget? If the school board just stood up and said, well, trust us, you know, we're going to do all these studies, but we'd like to have you pass our budget without any information, or the road report. You know, usually, and I've been going to town meetings since, I think I looked it up as the moderator since 1963 or some ridiculous, sometime a long, long time ago, and I never missed a one. But the budgets are always fully explained. You know what you're voting on, and if you get tricked one year, you certainly fix things the next year. This is, we're waiting for a group to do all these studies, but yet the work is basically done already. And so I really, you know, how this is going to affect all of our public buildings. You know, some of these buildings are old and they're going to be very hard to convert to a different type of heat. From my own experience, I know that heat pumps up in the northern part of Vermont, in the summer, they work fine cooling your house. In the fall, they'll keep the chill off, and maybe in the spring. But in the heart of winter, you want to have some good flannel pajamas and blankets around if it's all you're going to heat with. Up north is a heat pump, because maybe get some plug-in wire tape to put on your pipes, because you're going to end up in serious trouble. And you know, some people have said, well, these people don't know what they're writing to us about. They don't understand what we're going to save them all this money. But we haven't once told them how we were going to save them the money. So there's a lot of questions that I think are hanging out there that we're passing off to the next legislature to come back and enact this stuff. And I think it would be better if we did the study and presented the next legislature with the studies to design a bill from, because what I see in front of us and what I know, people don't drive to Vermont to view our mountaintops stripped off with windmills and plastered with windmills, and they don't come here to look at solar panels spread out in our meadows. They come here to see our scenic vistas and enjoy what we have. And if we eventually switch things all to electric, and we have a lot of little electric companies, but we basically have two major electric companies. Now, just think about it for a minute. What do you think is going to happen to our electric rates once we get down to two providers? So anyways, I cannot support this bill. I've gotten over 1,000 calls and emails, and you know, we're all sent here for one purpose, and that is to represent the people that send us here. We can make up excuses why we're going to support this, but remember why you're here. It's because the people voted and sent you here to do their bidding. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reason that I'm here today is because of my constituents and two particularly important people that I've thought about throughout the entire Senate Natural Resources and Energy process, in which we heard from over 50 witnesses, and we read research, and we understood the countless hours, months, and years of work that has gone into the consideration of a clean heat standard as a concept. The two people who are very important to me that I thought about throughout this process, you may have met. My mother and my father came to the swearing-in ceremony, and both of them loomed large for me as I considered what I felt about this bill. The first person being my father. He's a plumber, he's an electrician, he's a handyman, and that means that he has seen technology change over time and has changed his business along with the changing workforce and desires of his customers. He's an out of his truck, sometimes out of his van, other times plumber, and he installs cold climate heat pumps. He doesn't rip out the furnace or the boiler when he installs a cold climate heat pump, but what he does see is it reduces the fuel bill of his customers. He sees that it reduces the energy demands of his customers. And the people who can afford to put in cold climate heat pumps and weatherize their homes and install modern wood heating, all of the provisions in this bill are doing it now. The second person who I think about when I think about this bill is my mother. Today happens to be her birthday. And the reason I think about my mother is because we struggled with fuel insecurity when I was growing up. There were times where my father would have to take a gas can to Cumberland Farms to fill up at a gas station because we could not afford the upfront cost of fuel oil at that 100-gallon amount. So when I hear the concern from my constituents that they now, today, cannot afford their fuel prices, it makes me question if we are doing our due diligence as a government to actually support them and regulate the industry that has profited off them and profited off pollution. So when I think about this bill, and I think about the constituents who I spoke with over the weekend, over the last few months, I think about how can we alleviate the fuel insecurity and protect them from the fuel poverty that we know is coming if it has not already hit them. The other reason I think about my mother in this bill is because my mother is a renter. The people who will be left behind by the transition, if we don't act, if we don't plan, if we don't design for this, will be folks who are renters, who are low income, who are vulnerable Vermonters. The program that we could create, and that we're delaying to create another 2 years, will be able to help Vermonters like my mother, and will be able to support tradespeople like my father. It's simple. We heard from the Climate Council. It's their #1 recommendation. We have the marginal cost curve abatement report. We have the pathways report. We have so much information. We don't have time. My generation does not have time. I ask you, as the youngest member of this body, for you to consider that time and how the 2030 goals, the 2030 requirements and the 2050 requirements will impact my life and the people younger than me. And I hope that you have the courage to recognize that it's not surprising that the organizations that have benefited financially are the ones telling you that you should not regulate them. Because the people that I'm listening to on this bill are my father and my mother. The people who are impacted the most will be Vermonters. And we must consider this bill and be courageous in acting when the time is so short in this conversation. And I thank you, and I urge you to vote in favor of today's bill.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to recognize the senator from Chittenden North, Senator Renner.
Thank you, Mr. President. After 15 years as a town energy committee member, I'm well aware of the urgent need to halt the warming of the planet, the destruction of species, and the melting of glaciers. That urgency is not reflected in a bill whose rules will be written over the next 2 years. That urgency is reflected in the personal agency of Vermonters who get an energy audit and then follow up without government intervention in determining their best next move. That urgency was reflected, as was the agency, in a visit my household received last week while I stayed in Montpelier. An energy dealer came and spoke with my spouse about what we could do for more efficiency and to save money. The verdict, adding an electric heat pump would not save our household $1 in the short or the long run, given our particular situation. This aspect of personal agency is key to me and to more than 500 people from whom I've heard. They don't like the way S5 inserts a middleman or 2 or 3. And those middlemen, they don't come for free. In fact, this bill now requires an investment of $1.75 million to administer initial costs on the government side. We could buy hundreds of heat pumps for low-income Vermonters, flat out, with that kind of money. On the fuel dealer side, S5 will require more money to be spent on record keeping and marketing. In the real world, we can expect that dealers will pass those costs on to their customers in some form or other. Certainly, some fuel dealers may decide to shutter their businesses rather than deal with the hassle that they expect S5 to induce. We have a precedent for this in the legislature. Back in 2015, the legislature ratcheted up regulations for child care centers. Subsequently, 27% of them closed, making an existing shortage even worse. A lawmaker at the time was quoted in the press as saying, "We knew we'd lose a few," end of quote. When it comes to mom and pop propane dealers in my district, I'm really afraid we will lose a few if S5 passes. And that's not fear, that's precedent, settled reality. I would rather avert another preventable supply crisis. I think we have plenty else to deal with. As you've heard, S5 fails for me on urgency, agency, and costs. There are other ways that we can meet the GSWA targets. We need a simple, inexpensive heating plan. My no vote is not meant to disrespect in any way the earnest work done by the Committee of Origin. In fact, I applaud the efforts they put forward, but I respectfully disagree with their conclusions. And I bristle when anyone levels a charge of misinformation against their opponents. My no vote is a nod to representative government, similar to what Senator Starr said. The majority of my constituents do not want S5 to pass. Yes, some of them sent a form letter. Others sent heartfelt pleas and detailed their energy histories, including their experiences, in some cases, with electric cold climate heat pumps, or with careers in the energy field. There is wisdom among the masses. We in this room don't have a lock on reality. I would encourage my fellow senators to hear the voices of the Vermonters who, outside this building, understand exactly what S5 will mean for their province. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to recognize the senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the senator from Addison?
Senator from Addison will be interrogated.
So my question is, I've also been hammered by letters, notes from the Sergeant at Arms, phone calls, too numerous to mention, but one of the questions I've been asked the most times is, why is the state of Vermont, as a major stakeholder in the global warming solution, not even mentioned as far as being part of this bill? How do they fit into the plan?
It's an interesting question, and I think, if I would ask for a brief recess to double check my recollection with our legal counsel, or if you prefer, I can run down a complete answer for that and present it before third reading.
I will declare a brief recess of 2 minutes and bring us back then.
I thank you for the.
Please be seated. You may continue, Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. As verified with council, there's two really, if I understand the question about what's the role of the state of Vermont in this program, there's really two sides to that answer. First, there is on the development side of things, of course, we're enlisting the Public Utility Commission, Department of Public Service, Agency of Natural Resources in doing the work of creating the plan that will be evaluated by a future legislature. But if you're talking about the infrastructure of the state of Vermont, the buildings that we own and operate, this bill does not distinguish based on who is buying the fuel. It's that the fuel itself is part of the program. So regardless of the customer, it's the fuel that is, the party selling the fuel is the obligated party.
So if I'm right, Mr. President, so the taxpayers are going to be paying twice. They're going to be paying for the institutions and the buildings and the trucks and cars of the state government, as well as paying for their own heating of their property and their homes.
I respectfully disagree. There is no tax in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I encourage everybody to vote no on this bill.
Thank you, Senator. I will remind senators of the question. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to be quiet, but we've heard from the youth, and I'm one of the old geezers who didn't know enough to retire. And I've spent a fair amount of hours reassuring senior citizens that we were not raising their fuel oil prices immediately by 70 or 80 cents. They might, but that was probably Saudi Arabia or somebody else that was going to do it. I think what we're trying to do is find a way to move Vermont from dependence on fossil fuels to another fuel source that is cleaner. And we're trying to do that. I think what we're all struggling with, though, is we don't want to admit that it's going to cost some money to do that. And it's going to it's definitely going to cost fuel oil dealers because they're going to get to sell less, or we're going to charge them with credits. That's going to get funneled down at some point to people that buy fuel. On the other hand, some of us may have good credit histories and equity in our houses, and we can get some, credit, and we can put in heat pumps. We also have to maintain and replace our oil furnaces. But many of us don't. Many of us are on fixed income, and we're not going to live to see 2050. If we do, we're probably going to be in a nursing home. We have a certain amount of saved income, and a major expense eats that. Another group of us have just bought houses or are paying today's inflated apartment rents. And we're questioning, how do we come up with the money to do this? I'm leveraged to the hilt paying my mortgage, and I've got no equity in my house. And if the housing market goes down like it's likely to, I may be underwater. I may owe more than the house is worth. So I think we are all struggling to get there. But what we need to do, what we're doing today, is ensuring people, as I've been ensuring them on the phone, we are not raising your fuel prices tomorrow. And yes, your fuel prices are going to go up. And so if you're on cheaper fuel, whose future we don't know either, but we have more control over, you're going to save money. But that leaves out the cost of the transition. And I think what we need to do is to help people understand and to be willing to put our money where our mouth is and help people find a way to make that transition to, we've been helping low and moderate income in my county, I was told was $74,000 a year. I wouldn't want to try and raise a family, you know, and put another $20,000 in heat pumps or, you know, any kinds of transitional on that kind of income. I think I'm going to vote for this bill because it is going to get us some numbers. Right now, we are dealing in concerns and theories and aspirations on all sides. I think we need to send people with the expertise out there to get us the numbers, to tell us what it is going to cost, what the impact will be, and then we can sit down with facts and have the discussion about, okay, given these facts, what do we as a state invest? What can we reasonably ask people to invest? And how do we move forward? And until we have the data, the evidence, evidence-based data, I've spent years on health and welfare, until we get the evidence-based data, we are having a debate based on thoughts and beliefs and speculations. We are not having one based on fact, except that fuel oil prices have gone up a lot, and that climate change is happening. Some people may deny that, but I think the bulk know that it is. But how you put those together, we need facts before we make any final decision.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Orange.
Mr. President, we talked a little about fear today, and I wanted to recognize my colleague who was fearless just moments ago. If we follow this plan, we're looking at another couple years before we begin to take some of the actions that the senator from Washington said we hope we can take, and we only feel we can take them when the numbers become more visible and we have some faith in a plan. Someone suggested not long ago that we needed a solution that was simple and inexpensive. We wouldn't be here today 880 days after we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act if there was a solution that was simple and inexpensive. To my Senate colleague on natural resources who said, if I don't have the time to wait to do this. Well, the senator from Essex Orleans, who is born within 24 hours of myself, if this senator doesn't have the time, what do we have? What do we have when it comes to time? When the Global Warming Solutions Act passed, I reported that bill and remarked that this World War II began and ended within 336 days. Since that bill passed, 880 days have passed, and we haven't moved. We've moved forward in thought, we haven't moved forward in action. So my last question that I would ask is rhetorical, but heaven forbid I would ever ask such a question. If we pass this bill and our constituents say to us, I can't afford what I'm paying for today. I just can't afford it. What should I do? I tried to answer that question last year. I said, well, maybe you could put on an extra sweater and you could get some blankets and use more than you have been using. In my local paper, I was told that I had insulted Vermonters. I should apologize and I should resign for having uttered those words. If we pass this bill and Vermonters ask us what they should do in the meantime, I welcome any other explanation. But I don't think there is a simple explanation that is, I'm looking for a word that kind of goes along with inexpensive. There's no simple explanation that is truthful, or you aren't going to get people that don't like what you tell them. My colleague from Essex Orleans mentioned blankets and a sweater just a few minutes ago. For a room here today where we've talked about fear, my hat, sir, is off to you for being fearless in your suggestion. I was going to dare someone to come up with a suggestion, but the senator from Essex Orleans came up with it. Even if we pass this bill in the short term, people are going to ask us what to do. What are you going to say? If we don't pass the bill, they're going to ask us, what are you going to do? The prices are through the roof. We'll tell them that we can't regulate free enterprise. We'll tell them it's the federal government's problem. We'll find all sorts of reasons to say we couldn't do anything because we couldn't find something that was simple and inexpensive. That's our dilemma. And sometimes my chair and I argue with my chair, the senator from Washington, and she has a knack for giving, I want to say simple advice, but the right advice when no other avenues are open. I hope we pass this bill, we face our constituents and tell them they're going to be in for a rough ride, unless the oil companies turn around and decide they aren't going to do what they're doing right now. And it's going to take time. And I don't want to give them this advice because this is where I shop. Tell them, go to where you can buy some warm, used clothing. Because you may need it, and you may need some blankets in the interim. Or if you're wealthy enough to pay for the fuel at the price it's being sold at, which is unregulated, and they're free to do, that's where we are. And I hope we move forward and not have the same conversation a year from now, and perhaps have it 2 years from now when the plan and the rules are before us and we have done our own research to think about a simpler and more inexpensive solution, and avoid just saying no. Thank you, Mr. President.
I will remind senators of the question. Question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? And I would look now to the senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I inquire of the presenter of S5, please?
Porter of the bill will be interrogated.
Mr. President, we're talking a lot about costs, and as my seatmate and I, even though we might be in different districts now, we share the same people, and a lot of them are quite frankly, just they might be poor in what they have for monies in the bank, but they're rich in life, but they really can't afford probably what a lot of the other parts of the state can afford. So I'd ask, Mr. President, the legislation talks a lot about low-income Vermonters and equity, and should this bill pass, can you indicate the specific levels of cost sharing for low-income Vermonters in the transition described in this bill?
I thank you for the question, because low and moderate income Vermonters have been at the heart of many of the revisions of this bill compared to the bill we examined and passed a year ago. The short answer is that the bill, as amended, is going to develop a detailed analysis and plan for a possible clean heat standard. The next legislature will have to evaluate that plan and then take a step through a bill and a vote in order to implement it. When that plan is presented, there'll be much more detailed information available to answer the question that you're asking. And so I'd say, the best answer will be available to the next legislature. In the meantime, though, we have numerous provisions in there that ask the PUC in examining and designing the program to provide services with an eye on making it affordable to low and moderate income Vermonters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir. So we're voting on a bill that none of it's going to be around by the sounds of it when it's all said and done. Everything's going to change. I would just wonder why we would stand here and vote on something that isn't in 2 years' time, more than likely, is not even going to be the same words that we're reading here today. But should this bill pass, it is going to cost, it's going to hammer the middle class and people of poorer people. There's no question about it. We've heard the numbers, and I think the numbers might be conservative. You can't charge fuel dealers more money and don't think that they're going to pass it on because they are. We've heard about how right now their heat pumps. I've got one company that services lower income people in the Northeast Kingdom. And they're 160 heat pumps behind. They just can't get them installed. We heard yesterday in the governor's address about the one plumber who could use 8 more people if he could have them. And that's just to take care of the work he has, never mind anything that a bill of this magnitude would provide. But I would just say this. If this bill is to pass, I just want to apologize. I want to apologize to the Vermonters who have contacted me overwhelmingly and asked that I not support S5. I want to apologize to all the single moms who now will need to make a decision on whether filling their oil tanks or buy their daughters basketball shoes or their sons gloves to play Little League. I apologize to them because now she has to make a tough decision. She has to make a tough decision whether to fill that fuel tank or buy groceries for a household. I apologize to the young family who needs now to make decisions on whether, finally, after struggling through COVID years, whether they could take a vacation together or whether they could use that money to figure out how they'll keep their tanks filled for the winter. I also apologize, as some years back in my life, I laid awake at night struggling as a young family with 2 kids and a wife, listening as the oil tank, as the furnace ran, and just praying that didn't run out in the middle of the night. And as I finally drifted off to sleep, prayed that when I woke up in the morning that the house wouldn't be cold. And I did what the senator asked to do. I did make sure that I went and tucked those kids in a little bit tighter with another blanket to make sure that they were good and warm. I apologize to the elderly who are now still struggling, cutting their medicines in half and figuring out again how to fix that car that's broke down in your yard and how they're gonna supply themselves with food on a fixed income. I just apologize like there's no tomorrow. I apologize to the 80% of Vermonters living paycheck to paycheck. It isn't the war in Ukraine. It isn't a natural disaster. It isn't a lack of energy that's causing them or going to cause them to struggle more. It's politics. It's just plain politics. And that's something that we could stop. I apologize to all my constituents and fellow Vermonters who have done their part, making their voices heard like only a few times before in this modern times of this building, only to learn that they're just going to do what you want to do anyways, and it doesn't matter. And but because others know best. So, Mr. President, thank you, and to all the Vermonters, I apologize. I apologize for this bill passed, that I've let you down, and I truly feel like I have let you down, and I apologize. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I voted in support of this bill in the Appropriations Committee. I was a force behind the amendment that came in that in fact allows us to move forward to explore the concept that was included in the governor's plan and comprehensive energy plan. I would never, I want to state that this bill does not increase the cost of fuel. I want to state that I did not in any way want to do anything that would be to the detriment of the people of Vermont. I have over 50 years of public service, both serving some of the most disadvantaged and the poorest people in the state of Vermont. I have worked to make sure that their interests are represented. I am very concerned that in any way that a vote for this bill is interpreted as somehow making lives more difficult. I want to state that in fact, if we look at the fiscal memo that was done by our Joint Fiscal Office and looks at the work on the impact on Vermont's economy and look at it from that perspective, what we're doing is examining a concept that in fact people believe would have a beneficial impact overall on the economy and Vermont. So I simply want to state that in looking at this bill before us today, please remember with the amendment that was approved and already voted on to simply move forward with this plan, understand its full impact, and allow us to give it full and careful consideration. That is what we're doing today. We're not increasing the cost of fuel. We're not doing anything except moving forward. And if in fact this plan does have a beneficial impact that the Vermont Pathways Analysis Report suggests it does, then what we're doing is something that would be to the benefit of Vermonters. So I simply want to state, please remember what this is doing is supporting the study and the analysis around this proposal that many experts feel would have a beneficial impact. And to suggest that to simply do the analysis study would have a detrimental impact on Vermonters today, or even 2 years from now, when the legislature is going to act with more information and make an informed decision, is really what is at issue when we vote right now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to recognize the senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of times this afternoon, someone has suggested that this bill would be a bad idea because moderate income and low income Vermonters are struggling financially, and in particular as regards the cost of heating fuel, and that to support the bill somehow exhibits an insensitivity to that fact. Vermonters are struggling now, and the bill is not in force. They're struggling not because of environmentalists, not because of efforts to attack global warming. They're struggling because of how high the price is for fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the problem. The bill aims to help people get off of fossil fuels because they're struggling, because they're having a problem. Now, the trouble with the alternatives to fossil fuels is that while they are not just cheaper
they're much cheaper, and they're more reliable, they're less unpredictable. They are expensive to get into in the first place. And that's where people have the idea that somehow doing the right thing about the environment and keeping your own costs down is an elitist privilege. The bill recognizes that right now, the more affluent people are in a better position to do the right thing. The bill is set up to help moderate income and low income people. It is to make life easier. And the idea that it's going to make life harder, well, a lot of people are convinced of that. I've gotten emails too, and it's pretty frustrating. But the good news is that doing the right thing by our environment also makes life easier. I'm troubled that in this discussion, there has been occasional reference to global warming, but it's really the underlying issue here. And if people think that green energy is expensive, how do they propose we pay for global warming? If they don't like this plan, what is their plan? And make no mistake, no plan is a plan. No plan is a plan to let things continue as they are. And just people who advocate for that, I've got to say, I'm sorry. We can't afford your plan. Your plan is way too expensive. I have enough of a fondness for quotes that my colleagues rid me about it from time to time. But I want to quote President George W. Bush, who said, "We have got to kick our addiction to fossil fuels." And another quote, and this in particular, I would say to people who say that we're putting the cart before the horse, that we're rushing things. We can get started now to deal with energy conservation. We can get started now and move incrementally and slowly and relatively painlessly. Or we can wait 30 years and have a catastrophe on our hands. President Jimmy Carter, 1979. We've waited 40 years. We're 40 years behind schedule. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. I'll remind everyone of the question. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. And honestly, very much enjoyed the conversation back and forth and appreciate the passion people are bringing to the discussion. I just want to remind us, though, of two fundamental things. One is that when people worry that we couldn't possibly know how to do this, I want us to pause and appreciate our own history with Efficiency Vermont. It was 23 years ago, a very controversial idea that we'd had of a statewide energy efficiency utility. We have, as Vermonters, month by month invested between 2000 and its inception through 2020, $709 million. That's a big investment that we all put in. But the savings that we've earned by that is $2.8 billion. So when we come together, think together, act smart, we have ways, we've demonstrated to ourselves ways that we can make progress by constructing a program that is carefully constructed. The bill, especially as modified by our action today, means that we won't start another program, the Clean Heat Standard, until it will be profoundly studied and vetted and analyzed and costed out. We will be proceeding with more information in hand than I think any program I've ever seen the state consider before. So there's no rush here. To the notion that we're picking this as a winner and excluding everything else, There's, as it's come up, the chair of Appropriations has mentioned it already in the Vermont Comprehensive Energy Plan prepared by the Department of Public Service, not the legislature, not some sort of outside group, has recommended that we have a performance standard, a clean heat standard for thermal fuels. We are following that recommendation from the expert group, our own government. Secondly, we have the opportunity to explore other avenues while we figure this one out. This is not betting on one horse. There'll be other ideas. The Senator from Essex Orleans had mentioned the omission of aviation fuels and others. I don't know if he wants to explore bringing those into another paradigm, but those are transportation fuels. That's not part of this bill. So I would just, and then third, the notion that somehow voting for this is being insensitive to people at home is troubling to me, because we just made a change that turned this into a plan to be reviewed in full in 2025 by a future legislature. Unless you've been receiving slips of paper on the floor while we've been here, you're not receiving feedback on the very bill that we're planning on voting and advancing now. So when you go home and someone says, I wish you hadn't done that, I hope people will stop and say, we heard your concern. We decided to do the best possible planning we could, and we're not moving it forward until we have a complete review at the legislative level. That to me is prudent. That to me is also stepping into the problem and not just sitting it out. So if I had one more story. Monday, I was at a legislative breakfast in Bristol, Vermont. Fuel dealers knew I was going to be there, and there were a lot of fuel dealers there. And the conversation got a little heated. But as we finished up, I went out to the parking lot and I kept talking with them. And what I heard once the rhetoric slowed down, they said, you know, our business is already changing. We're already going this way. We already know these things are going to happen. What we want to know, though, is how good is the plan? You know, don't decide to move ahead without having a solid plan, well-defined, well-costed, well-analyzed. They said, if you would do that, then that would give us a lot more comfort. And we know that you have thought about us and how to have them be part of that plan. I'll say one more thing about the fuel dealers themselves. They are, we took testimony from them. I know many. They are respected parties, and they are part of this plan. They are a sort of a virtual army out there. 10,000 people work delivering home heating fuel and servicing all this heating equipment. The future that they're talking about, moving to cleaner fuels, they are an essential part of it. That's why we already have built them into workforce training and education programs. That's why we're trying to help them find the workforce they need and develop the workforce they need. So on every front, I really feel like we're doing the most responsible thing that we can for folks at home by advancing this bill. And I would ask that when we take the vote, we take it by roll call.
A roll call vote has been requested. Senator from Madison, is your motion for a roll call on the amendment or on the passage of the bill to the third reading?
Thank you, Mr. President. I withdraw the motion for amending the bill, and we'll make the same motion for the passage.
So noted.
Third reading.
Point of order.
Point of order, Senator from Washington.
I thought we already had a voice vote on the amendment.
This would be to amend the bill as amended.
Thank you.
The question now is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? The Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill?
The reporter of the bill will be interrogated.
I just would like to clarify, Mr. President, that what we're talking about here is not a bill or program. We're talking about a study. Is that correct? And that's all this is?
I don't think I would characterize it as just a study. It is to construct a plan that can be reviewed by a future legislature, and if they deem it worthy, to vote it forward.
All right. Thank you. Mr. President, I asked that question after reading an article in the Addison Independent. May I quote the portion of that article that's relevant to this?
Without objection.
The article is a March 1 article in the Addison Independent that says Senator Chris Bray, Democrat, Addison County, told the Independent on Tuesday that the Affordable Heat Act, also known as AHA, will be converted into a 2-year study. Said the change would be made to S5 when it's taken up by the full Senate, and so on. It also goes on to say the Clean Heat program will not go into effect until a future legislature introduces a new bill to implement a clean heat program. Bray wrote in a February 28 email, the study will include, the bill includes, will determine the costs and benefits of a possible clean heat program in much more detail.
I'm sorry. Whoever's phone is dinging, we have a history in this chamber of actually confiscating and destroying phones. So please, if it's yours, now is the time. Please continue.
Thank you. And so as I read this quote, it says that you say that this is a study and nothing more, at least to the press, which is correct.
I'm sorry. I haven't seen that article, so I'd want to take a look at it. I don't know if you want to, I'm speaking today, and I'm telling you what I think today and know today. And what I say today is that this is a plan of action that can be evaluated and moved forward by a future legislature.
Mr. President, in the testimony of the chair of the Appropriations Committee, I believe she testified, and as we look at the amendment that Appropriations provided, that the amendment deals solely with the Commission's ability to adopt rules. Is that your understanding, Mr. President?
The amendment, as I understand it, and we can verify with counsel if we need to get into the nuances of it, is that the plan is delivered in the form of a rule and associated reports along the way in the development of that rule. So if you, yes, we will have a rule to evaluate in 2025. It's due to be delivered to the legislature, the General Assembly, in January 15th, 2025.
The provisions in now revised Section 8131 Rulemaking Authority, which is contained in the amendment, says that the Commission will not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State or issues orders implementing the Clean Heat Standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. At the same time, as I look at, and perhaps this amends this, and I wonder if you could clarify, as I look at Section 8126 of the underlying bill before the amendment, says the Commission shall adopt rules and may issue orders to implement and enforce the Clean Heat Standard program. But it then goes on to say the requirement to adopt rules does not in any way impair the Commission's authority to issue orders or take any other actions, both before and after the final rules take effect. And then as I look elsewhere in the bill, I see a number of specific charges to people and organizations. For example, the Commission shall, by rule or order, establish a standard implementation timeline. On or before August 31, 2023, the Public Utility Commission shall commence a proceeding to implement Section 3, the Clean Heat Standard of the Act. Greenhouse gas inventories. It says that will work in conjunction with other states or regional consortiums to establish a periodic and consistent inventory of greenhouse gases. And there are other provisions, some of which involve the issuance of orders. Are those precluded by the amendment?
I would ask for a brief recess to consult with counsel because the language of the amendment from appropriations is very specific in terms of its the way it interacts with the Administrative Procedures Act.
I will declare a brief recess. I'll ask senators to remain close to their seats at this point. Senate will come back to order, and Senator from Addison has.
Thank you, Mr. President. In response to the query about the ability to do orders or rules, I would point senators to the first instance of amendment in section 8131, where it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, the commission shall not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the Clean Heat Standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly.
And does that then mean that section 8131 has been deleted by that amendment?
8131 is the amendment we just passed, and it's the one that now prohibits the commission from filing proposed rules or issuing any orders until there's been a vote of the next General Assembly.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean 8131, I meant 8126.
Well, I think the language in 8131 will be controlling.
So does 8126 remain?
8126 remains within the bill, but 8131, by virtue of the amendment we just passed, is controlling.
Is there not a conflict between those two sections?
I believe, we can pause again and ask legislative counsel. My understanding is that when you amend a bill, the amendment is controlling over the language that we just amended.
Well, in any case, the question, and that may become academic at this point, but I see a conflict, at least as I read what I'm reading here. But I believe what the reporter has indicated is that this is a study, and somewhat more than a study. It does not appear to be consistent with at least how he's quoted. He may have been inaccurately quoted by the press. But as I read the article, it's materially different than simply a study. Now, if it's a study, though, it was not a study prior to the amendment by the Appropriations Committee, was it?
No, it would not, well, I'm not, I'm sorry, I can't accept the premise of the question. It's not a study. I'm here today, I'm speaking today, I'm speaking now, and I'm telling you it is a plan. And
if I might, as an informational point, the reason why you need to ask permission to introduce a news article is to allow people the right to object for exactly the reason that I think the senator was pointing out, which is that it doesn't meet our standards in terms of evidence because it's produced by outside forces. So with that said, I think continued discussion of a news article is probably not where our rules point us.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would, though, remind the chair that I requested permission to read from the article and did so on the basis of the chair's permission.
Absolutely, and you have done so, Senator.
So this particular bill then was not a study or review or anything else until about 4 to 5 days ago when Appropriations did what it did. It was actually a bill to be implemented as a clean heat standard in this current session, wasn't it?
I think I'd have to look at the calendar. I think it is perhaps 2 days ago that the Appropriations Committee voted to amend the bill, and it did not include a provision to enact a plan for review by a future legislature until that time. However, as I said, I had had a conversation with fuel dealers and others. I too have received many notes and have thought carefully about the situation we're in. The idea, the concept of including in this bill a so-called check back vote, which is what we did in H715 a year ago, was clearly contemplated by a number of people, including me. The merit of such a vote became more and more clear to me as I had more conversations with my neighbors. And again, the thing I heard in short was, we know we need to have this transition take place. We're uncertain about the costs and what it will mean to me personally. So if you could be prudent and sort of quote unquote slow down, that would be helpful. So when I returned to the legislature this week, actually probably before I did, I had already talked to leadership and perhaps the chair of Appropriations and about supporting this amendment because I thought it was prudent.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the reporter. I can only, obviously I have concerns about the bill as amended and what it does, and above all, what it doesn't do and what it doesn't say. My normal concept of a study that we do in this body is we take a problem and we look at the problem and we cause a study to be taken without predetermined conclusions. And then based on that study, at a future time, a future legislature may act. In this particular bill, though, we have an outline of a very specific program with specific definitions, conditions, and terms that don't now exist. And then we're asking, essentially, a future legislature, at least the way the amendment, the bill as amended reads, to simply tell us whether or not we'll allow the PUC to adopt rules or not, without the detail behind it. Normally, I would think when we do a study like this, we have the results of the study in bill form to be presented where we look at the entirety of the issue and then we vote on it. And then both chambers vote on it to, in effect, create a bill. We don't deal with the underlying rules as the only thing being approved. That to me is very confusing and very concerning as to what it is that we're actually asking for and what it is that we will actually get. I'm also just concerned about the entire concept of what we're doing with all of the assumptions that are made in the body of the bill. And it's partly from a personal issue. This past summer, I have an oil furnace at home, and the oil furnace failed. It failed, and the manufacturer could not deliver the new core to the system in time for winter. So I could have, as the senator from Orange suggested, get a couple of blankets and go through the winter without heat, or I could buy a new furnace. And I went out looking for a new furnace, and I did all the things you're supposed to do. I talked to Efficiency Vermont. I have to add, we're of no help whatsoever, none. I went to a variety of Efficiency Vermont approved dealers for energy products to do things like weatherization and upgrade. Heat pumps was certainly an item on the agenda, but they had a 10-month waiting list to even put something in, much less do it in time for this winter. And everybody else I talked to also had a supply chain problem. And the supply chain was either in the installation or in the manpower necessary to do the installation, both of which you have to have. And that's consistent with testimony not testimony, but statements that I heard yesterday from an electrician who spoke in the governor's office before the media, describing the problem of getting people to do this kind of work, particularly electricians, because we have a clear shortage of electricians as well. I had an energy audit done in my house. I had it done, 10 years ago. Did some things, but didn't do most of them. And I brought that back out and I had it updated. And I looked at the fact that I could save 37% of my fuel cost with oil if I implemented these measures contained in the plan. The only problem is no one measure would save more than 3% of my fuel bill. And the return on investment was 13 years. Now, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I can tell you that it was not a practical solution when I consider how much oil I am likely to use. And then when I looked at, even if I were able to get the heat pump, the assurance was the heat pump would not heat my house, because I live up by the Canadian border on the coldest days of the year, and I would still need a supplemental heat source. So what does that mean? I've got to put in another oil burner? Well, no, that's not the approved solution. I'd have to do something like put in pellets. My wife's just had heart surgery, and I'm down here during the day, and she's not going up and down the steps with 40-pound bags of pellets, nor am I going to put in an automated system to deliver the pellets in a large, old, drafty house. So it wasn't a solution. So I got a new oil burner. And I'll tell you, my house is warm. May not be approved, and some people may not like it, and some people may not like it as the greatest solution, but as a practical matter, we make solutions on what we can do and where the technology is. The technology in 10 years may be much better. In 5 years, 10 years, however many years, we may have heat pumps that will actually cool an old drafty Vermont home in far northern Vermont on the days when it's 20 or 25 below zero. But I haven't found that stove yet. And one of the things I can't help but remember is Senator Bill Doyle, who was in this chamber, and he told me one thing that's lasted with me. If you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And in this bill, particularly in terms of the markup and the discussion in committee, there was no member of the minority party present. We weren't allowed to be on the committee, even though some of us asked. And so we have, I think, a very one-sided discussion and a one-sided bill. I've gotten more than 700 notes, letters, emails, phone calls from people all over Vermont about this bill. I have 3 who wrote me in favor of it. Now, some can suggest that there's a lot of ignorance around Vermont. People don't know what's in this bill. They're misinformed about what potential costs may come about, particularly in the early years of this implementation. Well, I think Vermonters are smarter than that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Orange.
Mr. President, the bill originally was written after several years of trying to find a solution, and it was written directing the PUC to write a rule. Most senators are familiar with what rules are and why we have them, but we do have 10 new senators this year. Often, the legislature sets goals and directs an agency of government to achieve those goals by writing rules that will achieve the law that is passed. In this case, the PUC with a budget would call in and go over the things that the Natural Resources Committee has proposed and looked at to write the rules to put that into law. Rules have the effect of law once they are adopted. This bill calls for the rules to be written, but has a big stop sign and says they shall not be adopted by the common rules procedure, regardless of how good they are or how bad they are or how well we all think they might work. The bill directs us to look at the proposed rules and then debate them before we have a vote on whether they should be implemented. Usually, rules are implemented by a rules committee that looks to see that the people that put the rules together have done due diligence and there's no legal or there's no arbitrary reason for not approving them. This, instead of having that committee do it, it has the whole legislature do it. The questions that the senator from Franklin asked about how does the bill before us stop the rules from going into place, and what are the procedures under which the next legislature would adopt those rules as they were written, or as the next legislature might seek to modify them or amend them, is what we're discussing in the Appropriations Committee amendment. The senator from Franklin's questions are reasonable questions to be asked, and this is one of those situations where you say, before we get to third reading, I would hope and expect that every senator would understand how those questions would be answered when the rule comes 2 years from now. What authority and the mechanism for the Senate to say, well, we're not going to adopt those rules, or someone to move, well, we'll adopt them, but this will be changed and that'll be changed and this one will be, date will be extended. That would be a common practice, and before third reading, I'm sure the chair of Natural Resources will be able to answer those questions, and they are appropriate, reasonable questions to ask, and we should know the answers. So that's my remarks, and if the chair wants to embellish.
Chair recognizes the senator from Windsor, Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry not to be here today for this very good conversation, and I have enjoyed this debate. I'd like to address Senator from Franklin's concerns. For me, this is what we're going to get in 2 years is a full set of architect's plans. We cannot build this building. We cannot create and construct this transition unless we have a full set of architect's plans where we can bid it, we have a notion of what it's going to cost, what every room is going to look like, what every window, where every window is going to be placed. What we're asking for and what our expectation is that we will have a plan a set of architectural plans for us to construct this transition. That is when we're going to understand. And until we have those plans and until we have those detailed plans, we're not going to be able to understand fully how we're going to both finance this transition and how we are going to go through this transition. But transition, we must. Wearing my workforce development hat, and I would like to address some of the other concerns that my colleague raised. Workforce development. The electrical and plumber apprenticeships are some of the most robust in Vermont, in the country. We have a fabulous apprenticeship program with our electrical and and our plumbing trades. And we have they've already invested enormously in this industry upskilling. They are already, 3 out of 5 of our fuel dealers are already installing heat pumps, are already installing all forms of advanced wood heat and advanced heating systems that are going to meet the needs of a clean energy future. They wanted to get to the table. They did not want another regulatory utility. They wanted to be part of the solution. And here they are, part of the solution. So they're already upskilling. They're already meeting the demands of the market. This is capitalism at its best. The market is already driving the need to upskill and to produce these products. In last year's workforce development bill, as you will recall, we invested additionally heavily, already independent of the electrical and plumbing unions, which have these great apprenticeship programs. We've invested millions of dollars into tuition, licensing, and exam fees for our trade, for people going into the trade, specifically to include clean heat energy and efficiency and weatherization trades. We are investing in this. We have 2 or 3 years to build this out, and it is my great hope that we will have the workforce that is needed. We're already upskilling them. We will have the workforce necessary to meet the needs of this clean energy future. So it is with that I heard this morning, I don't know if the rest of you heard, but I heard Elon Musk on the radio talking about how full of hope and optimism he is for our world and for our economy. But that hope and optimism rests completely. Sorry. That hope and optimism only is completely dependent on if we're able to pivot away from fossil fuels, which are destroying our economy, our environment, and the world we know and love. And just to complete the economic development concern, it'd be irresponsible to not remind everybody that 4 of our iconic Vermont industries are completely dependent on our solving this problem. I will be apologizing, if we do nothing, I will be apologizing to those who are in agriculture, who are producing syrup, who own ski industries, our ski centers, our people who are invested so heavily in our forest products, and those who are in tourism. All of our role in the next 50 years, unless we step forward responsibly, we're going to have impact that we can't even imagine, and cannot even begin to imagine how to afford to pay for the cleanup. So I encourage us all to vote yes on this bill. We're investing in the workforce. We need our wonderful Vermont economies, and we need to protect the world as we know and love it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator from Windsor. I will repeat the question. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? And I would recognize the Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President.
at the risk of dragging this on, I would like to interrogate the reporter.
The reporter of the bill will be interrogated.
And despite the eloquent questions from the senator from Franklin, I'm still not 100% clear, so I'm just seeking clarity here. If the Public Utility Commission, after this study that they do, decide that the default delivery agent provision or the clean heat credit provision is not what it considers to be the way that they would set the plan up, do they have the ability to say, you know what, those aren't really great ideas, we're not going to do that?
So the development process for the rule that will come forward along with 5 reports and a long public engagement process, the rule that will come forward will have it will have analysis accompanying it so that the details of how a default delivery agent could be constructed, managed, the credits that are in the system, all those details will be spelled out. The senator from Windsor talked about it being looking like building plans. My version of that same analogy is we're sending out a blueprint, but it is a complicated building that we're talking about. So we're going to get very detailed engineering drawings back. They will actually be called a rule. And when we look at that rule, we'll be able to answer the kind of important questions you're asking now. But to ask before we've done the work, we can't answer them at this point.
So in their promulgation of rules, would they be limited by the existing provisions and mechanics contained in the Senate Bill 5?
I think the outlines of each step that are in the bill will direct their work. The answers they come back with, I think, are what we're counting on them to provide the next General Assembly with so that they can be evaluated.
Okay, I appreciate the clarity. I just one other question. What's the average useful life of a heat pump?
I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I can get that before third reading.
I thank the senator. So as we've already discussed today, all of us have received numerous emails, phone calls. We're out grocery shopping and someone taps us on the shoulder and wants to talk about this bill. I don't think there's any way around that. And I may be strange, but I took a little bit of time, actually a few hours, to return phone calls from constituents within my district. I have to admit, I didn't call anybody in the Franklin district or elsewhere, but I did call people back that were from the Rutland district, many of whom I know, and the names were very familiar. And we've talked a little bit about fear today and the concern that I think people legitimately have. So I'm just going to estimate, and I have no idea. After I get to a few hundred, I stop counting, but easily 95% of the contacts that I got back asked me to vote no on the bill. I only received 5% of the folks who said that this was worth supporting. So it's pretty clear to me which way I'm going to go, and I won't be supporting the bill. But again, I thank the committee for their hard work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you. I do want to come back to this question of the slips that we've been receiving, because we just amended the bill and made a substantive change to it, namely that the bill is delivering a plan of work and that will be evaluated by the next legislature. So the uncertainty that I've heard, the concerns I've heard about what will this mean to me, generally are based on impressions of a bill and a program that have not yet been developed. And as I've said numerous times, we're going to have much more complete information, or the next legislature will have much more complete information. And I think that legislature will be able to answer the questions that we've been asked. What will this mean to me? How much will it cost? What's the opportunity to save? How soon will I see a return on my investment? All those things. Great questions that all of us, I think, are sympathetic to. But to count, to sort of use a head count on the concerns expressed as a proxy for, is it worth asking the question and developing a plan and then evaluating the plan? I don't see the connection because constituents were not presented with this question. If you heard from the governor's climate action office that a clean heat standard might save Vermonters at large $6.4 billion between now and 2050, would you like them to look into that, or would you like them to refuse to look into it? So a no vote today is to say, I refuse to look into that. A yes vote means, that seems like something worth checking out. That's something that could save a lot of people money. Please go ahead, do the work. Don't obligate me to participate. Do the work, and then let the next legislature come back with a complete answer and take appropriate steps at that time when well informed.
The question again, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for that question? If so, roll call vote was requested on the underlying bill. So I will ask those in favor to signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay.
No. Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you have recommended the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy bill be amended. The next question is, shall the bill be read the third time? Senator from Addison, am I remembering your motion correctly that there be a roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. President, roll call is requested.
A roll call vote has been requested. Are you ready for that question? If so, I will ask the secretary to call the roll.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashimi.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
No.
Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Perschlick.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Pihowski.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
No.
Please listen to the results of your vote. The yeas 19, the nays 10. There being no tie, the chair does not vote. And so the yeas have it, and you have passed ordered third reading of S5. That completes the orders of the day. I would look to the senator from Grand Isle for a motion.
Mr. President, subject to any announcements, I move the Senate adjourns to tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m.
Senator from Grand Isle has moved that the Senate stand in adjournment until tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m. Are there any announcements? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. With apologies, but Senate Government Operations will be meeting at the fall of the gavel. We have witnesses waiting.
Senator from Bennington.
Mr. President, Senate Education will meet at 4:15.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will not be meeting because the chair has another legislative meeting.
Are there any further announcements? The senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations will not be, we have sent our witnesses home for the day. Thank you.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Grand Isle has moved that the Senate stand in adjournment until March 3rd at 11:30 a.m. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and we stand in adjournment until March 3rd, 11:30 a.m.